Are you tired of losing at your local Pokemon tournaments? Are you tired of going 0-4-1 every single week while the base Charizard, Roaring Moon, and Guardian players laugh in your face? Well, I've got the deck for you. This deck is guaranteed to ruin people's days while they don't get to play the game and you just sit there and take knockouts after knockouts after knockouts. What is good, people, and welcome to this channel. Today I'm going to be showing you the best road deck going forward in the Temporal Forces meta. So what we have here today is an Arceus Goodra Vulpix hybrid. So we have your classic 4-3 Arceus lineup. We have a 2-2 Goodra V-STAR lineup as well as a 1-1 Vulpix V-STAR lineup. Now, this is nothing new to the current Arceus Goodra that you rarely see these days, but I think what makes this deck really good is the simple inclusion of Mist Energy. So if you didn't know what Mist Energy does, is a new card coming in the upcoming set Temporal Forces, which reads, prevent all effects of attacks from your opponent's Pokemon done to the Pokemon this card is attached to. This card really helps you into the Roaring Moon and guaranteeing a V-STAR matchups, because before, a big problem for this deck is the fact that your Goodra V-STAR can just get outright O-code by those effects. So with this energy, that's no longer the case. As you can see, we still have your classic Bidoof Bibarel Skwovet engine. We have 2 Lake Acuity as the stadium of choice, essentially making your Goodra V-STAR a 370 HP monster after its Rolling Iron. This matters because in the upcoming format, the biggest threats to your Goodra is probably going to be C-Pow and Gholdengo. And what Lake Acuity does is makes them commit an extra energy for them to one-hit KO your Goodra V-STAR. And when you're committing so much energy already, finding that extra one is definitely a lot harder than you think. And if they miss that knockout, then it swings heavily in your favor due to the fact that, well, you're now trading 2 shots. And that's one thing those decks do not want to do against Goodra V-STAR. Speaking of which, this is also why that we include the 1-1 Vulpix V-STAR, because it kind of flips that matchup in its head. The Vulpix V-STAR Snow Mirage is a fantastic attack which does 160 damage, and it prevents all damage done to this Pokemon with Pokemon that have an ability. This is really good against those specific decks because every single attacker in those decks basically have an ability. Every single Pokemon, in fact, in those decks usually have an ability, which means they physically cannot touch this Vulpix after it's Snow Miraged. The only way they could ever get around this is if they double gust, and that's a lot to find, especially against an Arceus deck that's constantly refreshing your hand with Judges and Ionos. That's kind of the whole point, is why we run 4 of each. In fact, some games I believe you can outright just maybe have an Arceus to start, have a Vulpix, and then instantly Turo or Cheren the Arceus and just solo with the Vulpix, and I believe you win most of the matchups against C-Pow and Gholdengo because they literally don't have an attacker that can deal with this thing. And now just to clarify your supporter line, you have the usual 4 Iono, 4 Judge. I believe it's so bait to run Professor's Research in an Arceus deck. I don't think you need Professor's Research in an Arceus deck. I believe you want to just can disrupt your opponent every single turn, so I believe running more Ionos and more Judges is always correct in Arceus type decks. We have 3 bosses. Gusting is very good in Arceus, especially for those early knockouts if you want to pick off a Lumineon, Rotom, etc. on their bench. We have the Turo for the Cherens for the above reasons I mentioned before, and then we have the new supporter Eri. And what Eri reads is that your opponent reveals their hand, and you get to choose 2 item cards you find there and discard them. This could be very polarizing against certain decks early game, like Charizard, where you get to maybe discard like a rare candy and Ultra Ball. In other matchups, such as C-Pow and Gholdengo, if you were to play this card, and let's say you discard 2 superior energy retrieval, then you've just got immense value from this card because of all your Pokemon having such high HP. They're usually committing so much energy that they can't really afford for you to be discarding 2 of them like that. So it's a very good card for those matchups as well. Of course, you have 4 Ultra Ball, 4 Nest Ball, the best ball searches in the meta right now. You also play 2 Switch. This is a fairly cuttable card. I wouldn't cut Switches outright, but you can probably cut it down to 1 if you really like. 2 Switch is a luxury, 1 Switch is minimal. You have 1 counter catcher, and the A-spec of choice I've selected is Maximum Belt. Now, there's a very good argument for Hero's Cape as well. Hero's Cape gives your Pokemon 100 extra HP with no drawbacks. Maximum Belt lets you do 50 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon EX. So the key difference kind of depends on your local meta, because Maximum Belt is really good because it's not a reactive card. And what I mean by that is that Hero's Cape, you play it on your turn, and your opponent gets to react to it, and if they do, Hero's Cape literally does nothing. So, for example, if you play Hero's Cape and then you pass, you let your opponent go, and your opponent plays Vacuum, you essentially got 0 value out of Hero's Cape, and it just became a dead card. Now, Maximum Belt is something that you get to use on your turn and get instant value for. So, for example, it fixes your map of Goodra and Arceus for basic EXs. Because with that 50 extra damage, you should be one-shot every basic EX with the meta. Of course, if you have double turbo, you might miss some, but, you know, figure it out as you get there, I suppose. Also, in the Charger matchup specifically, Vulpix is a very fantastic attacker. Again, if you can solo Vulpix, meaning you just have Vulpix in the active and no bench, the Charger player usually ends up just scooping unless they played a Gouging Fire, which is a very rare card for players to play at the moment, because of most lists just outright don't run it. So they don't really have an answer to Vulpix. And one of the main problems for you still is that you are 3-shotting a Zard, but with Maximum Belt, it brings it to a 2-shot. So that's also a very good application for Maximum Belt. And again, it's really up to the local meta, whether you want to play Maximum Belt or Hero's Cape. If you deduct that in your tournaments that you're going to, there are not going to be a lot of vacuums, then I believe that Hero's Cape is a very good shout, because it brings your Goodra up to essentially 470 HP, sorry. And 470 is basically unkillable, even with Gholdengo and Chien-Pao. They're going to need like 8 energy for Chien-Pao and 10 energy for Gholdengo, which is usually the max amount of energy they run these days. So I think it's really up to your deduction whether you want to run Maximum Belt or Hero's Cape. As for energy, we have the 2 Mist Energy as mentioned before for those specific Moon and Tina situations. You can even put it on to prevent Stabilize at some point. We have the 1 V-Guard. We already have Lake Acuity for those Tina one-shots, but V-Guard is also a good alternative in case they bump your stadium. Of course, you have 4 double turbo for the Arceus and even the Vulpix, 3 metal, and 4 water. And that about wraps up this video. Again, if you want to make a few changes, what I would recommend is, again, Hero's Cape, Maximum Belt. I believe that's up to the player's preference. If you want to reduce the switch down to 1, you can maybe put down, let's say, an extra supporter, maybe a 4th boss. Honestly, isn't bad. A 2nd V-Guard, I guess, but it's very Tina matchup specific. You can also increase the count of Eri. Then again, that kind of determines on how the meta forms. Or you can just outright add more searches. The next best search probably is going to be Capture Aroma, which I don't hate because, again, turn 1 getting your Arceus down with energy is the most important thing for any Arceus deck. So having more chance of that happening, always good. But yeah, overall, I think this is a very good deck into the new meta. I think it counters so much of the top decks, especially Zard. You have so much answer for Zard. Goodra is amazing in the Zard because you're trading 2 shots, and no deck ever wants to trade 2 shots with Goodra. Vulpix basically outright wins that matchup for you because most Zard lists doesn't have an answer. Tina gets heavily countered now because of Mist Energy and the fact that you play so much damage reduction items and cards such as V-Guard and Lake. Gholdengo and C-Pow are going to be some of your tougher matchups, but I think Vulpix helps you fix those a lot. One card to look out for is Iron Bundle. If they start running Iron Bundle, you really want to start cleaning up your bench, because if they Iron Bundle and Boss or Iron Bundle and Prime Catcher you, you're going to be having a rough day. But then again, at the end of the day, your idea is, oh, I'm just going to go Arceus and I'm going to disrupt. So having them to pull off those combos is fairly rare, even if you don't clean up your bench that well. Yeah, I hope you liked the video and let me know if there's any changes you would make. And yeah, have a good one.